She walked into the bank wearing a grey cardigan and simple white t-shirt. "I'm sorry, but we don't serve people like you here," the manager sneered, pointing toward the exit. 7 minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up outside. When the distinguished silver-haired man stepped out and entered the bank, the manager's face turned ashen. She had just denied service to the billionaire's wife, who now owned the entire bank. The polished marble floors of Oakmont Financial gleamed under the morning light. Claire Wilson pushed through the heavy glass doors. Her simple grey cardigan and white t-shirt were a stark contrast to the sleek corporate atmosphere around her. At 33, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her brown shoulder-length hair falling naturally around her face. As she approached the waiting area, Claire felt the subtle shift in the room, the quick glances, the raised eyebrows, the silent judgments. She was used to it. Her choice to dress simply, despite her means, was deliberate, a personal philosophy she'd maintained long before meeting her husband. A young receptionist looked up, her eyes quickly scanning Claire's modest outfit and well-worn handbag before her smile stiffened into something practiced rather than genuine. "Good morning. How can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone implying that perhaps she couldn't. "I have an issue with a wire transfer for the Wilson Foundation," Claire explained. "It was supposed to clear yesterday, but the funds haven't been received by the Children's Hospital in Phoenix." The receptionist's fingers tapped at her keyboard. "I don't see any record of a major transfer under Wilson Foundation." "It's for $850,000, Claire said quietly. The receptionist's eyebrows lifted slightly. "I see. Well, for transactions of that magnitude, you'll need to speak with one of our relationship managers. Let me see if Miss Dawson is available." The way she emphasized magnitude carried clear skepticism. For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. Claire nodded, accustomed to not being taken seriously. She took a seat in the waiting area, noticing how other customers in business attire were being ushered directly to personal bankers without delay. Near the management offices, a small group of executives huddled in conversation, their occasional glances in her direction followed by subtle smirks. Claire focused on her phone, reviewing the email from Phoenix Children's Hospital about the urgently needed medical equipment the transfer was meant to purchase. After 20 minutes, while watching other customers come and go, a tall blonde woman in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit approached. Patricia Dawson's pearl necklace caught the light as she towered over Claire, not bothering to extend her hand. "I understand you have questions about a foundation transfer?" Her tone carried the same disbelief as the receptionist's. Claire stood, meeting Patricia's eyes directly. "Yes, I'm Claire Wilson with the Wilson Foundation. We have a pending transfer." "I'm sorry, but who exactly authorized you to manage foundation finances?" Patricia interrupted, her perfectly manicured hand moving dismissively. "Typically, foundation representatives carry proper identification and make appointments." Claire took a breath. "I am the foundation director. I established it 5 years ago." The skepticism in Patricia's eyes deepened as she looked Claire up and down once more. "Well, why don't we step over to my desk and see what this is all about?" Patricia said with a sigh that clearly communicated Claire was taking up valuable time. As they walked across the bank floor, Claire was keenly aware of the stares following them. Patricia's desk was positioned near large windows overlooking the financial district. She gestured for Claire to sit, her movements perfunctory. "So, Miss Wilson." "Claire Wilson," Claire supplied again. "Right, this transfer you're inquiring about. What's the account number?" Patricia asked, her fingers poised over her keyboard. Claire provided the information, which Patricia entered with a slight frown. "I'm not seeing any foundation with this level of capitalization under your name," Patricia said after a moment, her tone suggesting Claire might be confused or worse. Perhaps you're mistaken about the amounts involved. I'm not mistaken, Claire replied calmly. The Wilson Foundation has been with Oakmont for 3 years. We've moved millions through these accounts for children's medical initiatives. Patricia's eyebrows lifted. Millions through this bank? The skepticism in her voice was now unmistakable. And you're authorized to direct these supposed millions? Claire felt her cheeks warm slightly but kept her composure. Yes, as I mentioned, I'm the founder and director. A man in a tailored suit walked by, catching Patricia's eye. She brightened immediately, standing to greet him. Mr. Henderson, wonderful to see you today. How was the Bahamas trip? The man stopped, smiling broadly. Patricia, fantastic as always. The family loved the resort you recommended. I'm so glad. Will you be making any adjustments to your portfolio today? Patricia asked eagerly. Not today, just the usual deposit, he replied, glancing curiously at Claire. Patricia nodded pointedly, not introducing Claire. I'll be with you as soon as I wrap this up, she said, her tone implying it wouldn't take long. As Henderson walked away, Patricia turned back to Claire, the warmth in her expression evaporating. Now, Miss Wilson, I've checked our records thoroughly. We have no foundation account with significant balances under your name. Her tone had hardened. Are you perhaps confused about which bank holds these accounts? Claire retrieved her phone, opened her banking app, and turned the screen toward Patricia. This is our account. As you can see, the balance is $3.2 million, and there's a pending transfer of $850,000. Patricia glanced at the screen, her expression shifting from skepticism to suspicion. Anyone can create a mock-up of a banking app these days, she said dismissively. For transactions of this magnitude, we require proper documentation, identification, and typically an appointment with our private banking division. Claire took a deep breath. I can provide whatever documentation you need. Are you even a client of this bank? Patricia asked bluntly. Yes, as I've stated multiple times now, the Wilson Foundation has been with Oakmont for 3 years. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. And how did you come to be directing this foundation? The question was loaded with implication. Claire recognized it immediately. This woman thought she was an imposter, or perhaps at best, someone's secretary overstepping her bounds. I established it with my own funds initially, Claire replied, maintaining her composure, and have grown it through partnerships and strategic investments. Patricia leaned back, making no effort to hide her disbelief. I see. And these own funds, where did they come from exactly? The question was entirely inappropriate, and they both knew it. Claire felt her patience starting to fray. My personal finances aren't relevant to resolving this transfer issue, Miss Dawson. Claire remained seated. I'd like to speak with your manager, please. Patricia's expression hardened. I am the senior relationship manager for this branch, Miss Wilson, and I've given you my professional assessment. Without proper documentation and appointment protocols, we cannot assist with transactions of the magnitude you're describing. I have documentation, Claire insisted, reaching into her bag. Patricia raised her hand, stopping her. Not necessary. Even if you did, we require appointments for high-value clients. But I'm already a client, Claire insisted, her frustration finally showing. Several nearby customers and bank employees were now watching the interaction with undisguised interest. Patricia seemed to become acutely aware of the audience, straightening her already perfect posture. Miss Wilson, she said loudly enough for others to hear, this is clearly not your kind of bank. I've explained our protocols, which apply to everyone. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have clients with actual appointments waiting. The dismissal was unmistakable. Patricia gestured toward the exit, her hand with its perfectly manicured nails pointed firmly at the door. Claire felt the humiliation burning in her cheeks as she gathered her bag. The eyes of everyone in the bank followed her as Patricia continued, her voice carrying. "Perhaps a community credit union would be better suited to your needs. We specialize in high-net-worth clients here." Claire turned to face Patricia one last time. "You're making a mistake." Patricia's smile was glacial. "I don't believe I am. Security will show you out if necessary." A security guard took a half-step forward, though he looked uncertain. Claire turned and walked toward the exit, her head held high despite the burning humiliation. As she reached the glass doors, she heard Patricia's voice again. "Rogers, please make sure our legitimate clients aren't disturbed like this again." The doors closed behind Claire as she stepped into the morning air, her hand already reaching for her phone. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Now let's see what happens next. Inside Oakmont Financial Center, Patricia Dawson returned to her desk with a satisfied expression. Several colleagues gave her approving nods for handling the situation. The bank resumed its normal operations, the quiet hum of privileged transactions and polite conversation returning. Exactly 7 minutes after Claire had exited, the glass doors opened again. This time, heads turned immediately, but for a very different reason. A distinguished man in his early 50s entered the bank. His silver-grey hair was impeccably groomed, his posture commanding without effort. His tailored charcoal suit spoke of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. He was accompanied by 2 men in business attire who carried themselves with the unmistakable air of executives. The bank manager, William Chandler, emerged from his office immediately, hurrying across the marble floor with his hand extended. "Mr. Wilson, what an unexpected honor. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow's formal introduction," his voice carried across the now hushed bank floor. Robert Wilson shook his hand firmly but briefly. His expression was pleasant but unreadable. "I decided to stop by early, get a feel for the place," he replied, his deep voice carrying natural authority. "My wife mentioned she was coming in this morning to resolve an issue with our foundation's transfer." Chandler's smile faltered slightly. "Your wife, sir?" "Yes, Claire Wilson. About this tall." Robert gestured with his hand. "Brown hair, wearing a grey cardigan today. Has she been by?" A visible ripple of unease spread through the bank. Patricia, who had been watching from her desk, suddenly went very still, her face draining of colour. I'm not sure, sir," Chandler stammered. "I believe I assisted a woman by that name earlier," Patricia said, approaching the group with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "though she didn't mention any connection to you, Mr. Wilson." Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. "She wouldn't. Claire prefers to handle foundation matters on her own merits." He turned to one of the executives beside him. "David, would you please call Claire and ask her to join us? It seems we have matters to discuss." Patricia's smile became increasingly strained. "There may have been a slight misunderstanding, Mr. Wilson. The woman who came in didn't have proper identification for the accounts she was trying to access." "Interesting," Robert replied, his tone measured. "Considering my wife founded the Wilson Foundation 5 years ago and has been its executive director ever since, the same foundation that currently holds over $3 million in accounts at this bank." Chandler shot an alarmed look at Patricia. "I'm sure there's been some confusion, Mr. Wilson. Patricia is one of our most attentive relationship managers." "Is she?" Robert asked, his gaze now fixed directly on Patricia. "Tell me, Miss Dawson, how exactly did you assist my wife this morning?" The glass doors opened once more and Claire walked back in. The contrast between her simple appearance and her husband's executive presence was striking, yet there was a similar quality of quiet confidence about them both. "Robert," she acknowledged with a small smile. To the others she simply nodded, offering no greeting. The bank had gone completely silent. Every employee and customer was watching the scene unfold, many with dawning recognition and horror. "Claire?" Robert returned warmly. I was just asking Miss Dawson how she helped you this morning with the foundation transfer. Patricia's face had lost all colour now. Mrs. Wilson, there appears to have been a misunderstanding. Had you mentioned your connection? My connection? Claire asked, her voice calm. You mean my established account at this bank, or perhaps the foundation I created and have run for 5 years? Which connection would have merited professional service, Miss Dawson? Robert looked between them, his expression hardening as understanding dawned. Claire, were you denied service at this bank? Before Claire could answer, Patricia interjected desperately. Not denied, Mr. Wilson. I simply suggested that proper protocols be followed for transactions of that magnitude. Security measures, you understand. What I understand, Robert said, his voice dangerously quiet, is that my wife, who manages a multi-million-dollar charitable foundation, was apparently judged by her appearance rather than her financial credentials. Chandler stepped forward, sweat beading on his forehead. Mr. Wilson, please allow me to apologize profusely for any misunderstanding. Had you known what? Robert interrupted. That she was my wife? That's rather the point, isn't it? Your staff shouldn't need to know someone's connections to treat them with basic respect and professionalism. The silence in the bank was deafening now. Patricia looked as though she might faint. Perhaps, Claire suggested quietly, we should discuss this in private. Robert nodded, then turned to Chandler. Your office, please, and I'd like Miss Dawson to join us. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. As they moved toward the manager's office, the whispers began spreading through the bank like wildfire. The woman in the simple cardigan wasn't just any client. She was Claire Wilson, wife of billionaire tech innovator Robert Wilson, who had recently acquired a controlling interest in Oakmont Financial's parent company. And Patricia Dawson had just very publicly suggested she didn't belong there. Inside the manager's office, Chandler nervously offered chairs to Robert and Claire, while Patricia stood rigidly by the door, her professional poise shattered. Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson, I cannot express how deeply, Chandler began. Robert raised his hand, silencing him. Before we go further, I'd like to hear exactly what happened this morning. Claire? Claire spoke calmly, recounting each detail of her interaction with Patricia. The long wait while other customers were served immediately, the skepticism about her identity, the dismissive attitude toward the foundation, and finally, the very public suggestion that she should find a different bank more suited to her kind. When she finished, the room fell silent. Chandler looked physically ill. Patricia stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Miss Dawson, Robert said finally, his voice controlled but cold, is this an accurate account of what occurred? Patricia swallowed hard. I may have been somewhat direct in explaining our protocols, but that wasn't my question, Robert interrupted. Did you or did you not suggest to my wife that this was not her kind of bank and direct her to leave? Patricia's shoulders slumped. Yes, sir, but I had no idea who she was. And that makes it acceptable? Claire asked quietly. No, Mrs. Wilson, of course not, Chandler interjected. It was inexcusable, regardless. Yet it happened, Robert noted, in a bank that I now effectively own, a bank that I was assured maintains the highest standards of customer service. Chandler dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief. Mr. Wilson, I assure you this isolated incident doesn't reflect our values or typical service. Claire spoke calmly, recounting each detail of her interaction with Patricia. The long wait while other customers were served immediately, the skepticism about her identity, the dismissive attitude toward the foundation, and finally, the very public suggestion that she should find a different bank more suited to her kind. When she finished, the room fell silent. Chandler looked physically ill. Patricia stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Miss Dawson, Robert said finally, his voice controlled but cold, is this an accurate account of what occurred? Patricia swallowed hard. I may have been somewhat direct in explaining our protocols, but that wasn't my question, Robert interrupted. Did you or did you not suggest to my wife that this was not her kind of bank and direct her to leave? Patricia's shoulders slumped. Yes, sir, but I had no idea who she was. And that makes it acceptable? Claire asked quietly. No, Mrs. Wilson, of course not, Chandler interjected. It was inexcusable regardless. Yet it happened, Robert noted, in a bank that I now effectively own. A bank that I was assured maintains the highest standards of customer service. Chandler dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief. Mr. Wilson, I assure you this isolated incident doesn't reflect our values or typical service. I have a mortgage, a family. Patricia pleaded, her earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Claire, who had remained seated, looked up at her husband, then back to Patricia. The irony, Miss Dawson, is that I came here today not just about the transfer, but to discuss the Foundation's new initiative, providing financial education and affordable banking services to underserved communities. Patricia's face crumpled as the full impact of her actions began to sink in. Third, Robert continued, turning to Chandler, I want a complete audit of customer service practices at this branch, along with a thorough review of your training procedures. Yes, sir. I'll make it a priority, Chandler nodded vigorously. You misunderstand, Robert said. You won't be conducting it. You'll be participating in it while we evaluate your leadership of this branch. The audit will be conducted by an independent firm specializing in financial inclusion practices. Chandler paled but nodded silently. And finally, Robert turned back to Patricia, you'll clear out your desk today, under supervision. Your final paycheck and severance, which is more generous than deserved, will be contingent upon signing a non-disclosure agreement. You will not speak about this incident or about the Wilsons to anyone. Patricia nodded mutely, tears welling in her eyes. Claire stood finally. For what it's worth, Miss Dawson, I take no pleasure in this outcome. I simply came here as a client seeking service I was entitled to receive. As they prepared to leave the office, Robert paused at the door. Mr. Chandler, I want the remaining staff assembled in the main area in 5 minutes. I have a few words for everyone before we leave. The tension in the bank was palpable as employees gathered, watching Patricia clean out her desk with rigid movements and reddened eyes. Customers lingered, sensing the unfolding drama. When Robert and Claire emerged from the manager's office, a hush fell over the crowd. Robert's voice carried effortlessly across the marble-floored space. Good morning. For those who don't know me, I'm Robert Wilson, the new majority shareholder of Oakmont Financial Group. This was not how I planned to introduce myself. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled faces. Today, my wife Claire, who founded and directs the Wilson Foundation, a client of this bank for 3 years, was denied service based solely on her appearance. She was publicly humiliated and directed to leave these premises. Murmurs rippled through the group. Let me be absolutely clear. This is unacceptable and will not be tolerated moving forward. The purpose of a bank, of this bank, is to serve clients of all backgrounds with equal respect and professionalism. Claire stood beside him, her simple attire now carrying a different meaning to the watching crowd. In the coming weeks, this branch will undergo significant changes in leadership, policy, and culture. Those who cannot adjust to a more inclusive approach to banking will not remain with the organization. His words hung in the air, their impact unmistakable. Judge people by the content of their accounts, if you must, but never by the content of their closets. That will be all. 3 months later, Claire parked her modest sedan outside Oakmont Financial Center, now renamed Wilson Community Bank. The building looked similar from the outside, but the changes inside were immediately apparent. As she walked through the doors, she noted the new signage, banking for every journey. The interior had been redesigned, still elegant but more welcoming, with comfortable seating areas and clear information about services available without minimum balance requirements. David Chen, the new branch manager recruited from a community development bank in Chicago, greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson. The team is ready for the presentation whenever you are." Claire smiled. "Thank you, David. And please, it's still just Claire." In the main conference room, 20 bank employees, some familiar faces, many new, waited attentively. A large screen displayed the Wilson Foundation logo alongside the bank's new emblem. "Thank you all for being here," Claire began, her voice confident but approachable. "Today marks the official launch of our Financial Inclusion Initiative, a partnership between the Wilson Foundation and Wilson Community Bank." She advanced to the first slide, showing statistical data about unbanked and underbanked populations. For too many Americans, traditional banking feels inaccessible, intimidating, or simply not designed for their needs. Our initiative aims to change that perception and reality through 3 key programs. As Claire outlined the programs, free financial literacy workshops, no-fee checking accounts with no minimum balance, and small business microloans for underserved entrepreneurs, she noticed the genuine engagement from the staff. These weren't the same dismissive expressions she'd encountered 3 months ago. "Any questions?" she asked after concluding the presentation. A young banker raised her hand. "Mrs. Wilson?" "Sorry, Claire. How do you respond to competitors who say these services aren't profitable enough to sustain?" Claire smiled. "Banking isn't just about maximizing profit from a few wealthy clients. It's about creating sustainable relationships with many clients across the economic spectrum. Our early data shows higher than expected account retention and community goodwill. That translates to real business growth." After the meeting, Claire walked through the main floor, observing interactions between staff and customers. A woman in a housekeeper's uniform was being assisted with opening her first checking account, while a teenager in casual clothes learned about the student savings program. The bank hummed with a different kind of energy now, purposeful, inclusive, approachable. Outside in the parking lot, Claire met Robert, who was arriving for his own meeting. "How did it go?" he asked, walking alongside her. "Really well. The staff is genuinely embracing the changes." Claire glanced back at the building. "It's almost unrecognizable from that day." Robert nodded. "Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from unexpected places. Who would have thought that one terrible customer service experience would lead to reimagining the entire banking model?" Claire smiled. "I always believed banking could be both profitable and compassionate. Now we're proving it." As they reached the entrance, a woman exited the bank, middle-aged, simply dressed, looking relieved. She nodded shyly at them as she passed. "First account," she said quietly. "First time a bank didn't make me feel small." After she walked away, Robert and Claire exchanged a look of quiet satisfaction. "That," Claire said, "makes everything worthwhile." Robert squeezed her hand. "You know, most people would have used that moment 3 months ago for revenge. You used it for transformation." Claire shrugged slightly. "The best revenge isn't public humiliation. It's creating something better than what came before." As they walked into the bank, their bank, the security guard held the door with a genuine smile, not checking their attire, but greeting them as people. The simple dignity of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. In the end, it wasn't about wealth or power. It was about respect, and finally creating a financial institution where a cardigan and jeans received the same service as a tailored suit. Have you ever been judged by your appearance in a place of business? Or perhaps you witnessed someone else being treated poorly based on how they looked? Share your experience in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of comeuppance and transformation, hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss our next video. And remember, sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who don't need to show it. See you in our next story, where another powerful lesson awaits.